When we think about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, our minds usually jump to today's headlines. Breaking news, political speeches, maps filled with arrows and front lines. But what if I told you this story began long before modern borders were drawn? Long before tanks and missiles. In fact, it began over 1,000 years ago with princes, monks, Mongols, and empires. This conflict is not only about politics, but about memory, heritage, and identity. It is the story of two nations whose histories are inseparably entangled and whose futures have long been contested. So, let's journey back in time, through medieval kingdoms, imperial struggles, and the rise and fall of empires, to uncover the long history that shaped the present. Our story begins in the late 9th century with the founding of Kievan Rus. Imagine the bustling markets of Kiev, traders from Scandinavia bringing furs, merchants from Byzantium offering silk and wine, Slavic peasants carrying grain from the fertile lands along the Dnipro River. Kievan Rus wasn't a single ethnic state, but a federation. Vikings known as Varangians ruled over Slavic and Finnic peoples, creating a kingdom that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. It became one of medieval Europe's great powers. In 988, Prince Volodymyr the Great made a decision that changed history. He converted to Christianity, choosing orthodoxy from Byzantium. This single act tied the people of Rus not to Rome or Western Europe, but to Constantinople. It brought new art, language, and culture, onion-domed churches, Cyrillic writing, and Orthodox liturgy. But here's the catch. Both Russians and Ukrainians look back at Kievan Rus and say, that's ours. For Ukrainians, Kyiv is the heart of their origin. For Russians, Kievan Rus is the ancestral beginning of their state. One land, two claims, one seed of division. No kingdom lasts forever. In 1240, the Mongols stormed into Kiev. The city was burned, its population slaughtered. Kievan Rus collapsed into fragments. The Mongols created the Golden Horde, ruling much of the steppe. But while Ukraine's lands fell into the orbit of the Mongols, Poles, and Lithuanians, another Rus principality, Moscow, was learning a different lesson. Moscow's princes became Mongol tax collectors, paying tribute to survive. Over time, they grew stronger, eventually overthrowing their overlords. Thus was born the Grand Duchy of Moscow, the seed of modern Russia. From this moment, Ukraine and Moscow took separate historical roads. Ukraine leaned westward, influenced by Poland and Lithuania. Moscow turned inward, building the autocratic traditions that would define Russian rule. By the 1500s, most of Ukraine was under the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This meant Catholic nobles, Polish landlords, and heavy pressure on the largely Orthodox Ukrainian population. And out of this oppression came the Cossacks. The Cossacks were frontier warriors, free, fierce, and independent. Living on the wide, dangerous steppes, they defended their lands from Tatar raids, resisted Polish overlords, and created their own democratic traditions within their military communities. They became symbols of Ukrainian freedom, their songs and legends echoing across the centuries. But freedom has limits. By the 1640s, Ukrainian peasants and Cossacks revolted against Polish domination. Their leader, Bohdan Khmelnytsky, faced a choice: continue alone or seek allies. In 1654, he signed the Treaty of Pereyaslav with Moscow. To Ukrainians, this was meant as a temporary military alliance. To Russians, it was the start of unity. This moment remains one of the most contested in history, Was it friendship or the first step toward domination? By the 18th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was crumbling. Through a series of partitions, Poland disappeared from the map, and Ukraine's lands were split. The western regions, like Galicia, came under Austrian rule. The central and eastern parts fell fully under the Russian Empire. This division shaped Ukraine's identity. Western Ukrainians often leaned toward Europe, exposed to Austrian culture and more tolerant policies. Eastern Ukrainians were absorbed into Russia's autocratic system, where Ukrainian culture was suppressed. The Russian Empire erased Ukraine's autonomy. The Cossack Hetmanate was dismantled. Ukrainian schools were closed. In 1876, the M's Ukaz outright banned publications in Ukrainian. Even the word Ukraine was discouraged. Instead, it was Little Russia. But Ukraine's soil was invaluable. Known as the breadbasket of Europe, it produced grain for millions. And its Black Sea ports gave Russia access to global trade. This led to the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, when Russia clashed with Britain, France, and the Ottomans over control of the Black Sea. Though Russia lost, the war highlighted something lasting. Ukraine's geography made it the prize everyone wanted. The 19th century wasn't just about empires, it was about people. Across Europe, nationalism was rising. Italians, Germans, Hungarians all fought for self-determination. Ukrainians, too, began to awaken. The poet Taras Shevchenko gave Ukrainians a voice. His poems, written in Ukrainian, celebrated peasant life and lamented oppression. He became the father of Ukrainian literature and a symbol of national pride. This was dangerous to the Russian Empire because nationalism was more than poetry, it was a demand. A demand to be seen as distinct, not as Little Russia. Then came the 20th century, and with it, turmoil. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, Ukraine declared independence as the Ukrainian People's Republic. For a few years, Ukraine fought for survival against Bolsheviks, white armies, and foreign powers. But by 1922, it was absorbed into the Soviet Union. The scars only deepened. In the 1930s, Stalin's collectivization policies caused the Holodomor. Grain was seized from Ukrainian farms, leaving villages to starve. Millions died. For Ukrainians, this wasn't just famine, it was genocide. For Russians, it was framed as a tragic result of modernization. To this day, the memory of the Holodomor divides. Then came World War II. Ukraine became a battlefield once again. Nazi Germany invaded, promising liberation, but delivering mass death. Millions of Ukrainians died in concentration camps, on battlefields, or in reprisals. Kiev was leveled. When the Red Army returned, Ukraine was destroyed, but once more, locked into Soviet rule. During the Cold War, Ukraine was one of the USSR's most important republics. It had industry in the east, agriculture in the center, and the vital Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. It even housed part of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. In many ways, Ukraine was the jewel of the Soviet Union. But identity remained fragile. Officially, Ukrainians were brotherly people. In practice, dissent was crushed. Writers, priests, and activists who promoted Ukrainian culture were silenced. Yet underground movements kept the idea of independence alive. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Ukraine declared independence, and in a referendum, over 90% of Ukrainians voted to leave. Even in Crimea and the Donbass, support was overwhelming. it was historic. For the first time in centuries, Ukraine was a sovereign nation. But independence didn't erase the past. Russia still saw Ukraine as part of its sphere. Ukraine still bore scars from famine, empire, and war. And the question of identity, European or Russian, independent or dependent, remained unresolved. So why does history matter so much here? Because for both nations, history is not just remembered, it's weaponized. Russia points to Kievan Rus, to Pereyaslav, to centuries of shared struggle as proof of unity. Ukraine points to the Cossacks, to Shevchenko, to the Holodomor as proof of a distinct identity. Both tell stories that justify their present. Both carry wounds that shape their future. Closing reflection. When we watch the news today, it feels like the Russia-Ukraine conflict is unfolding in real time. But in truth, it is the latest chapter of a 1,000-year story. From the golden domes of Kievan Rus to the fields emptied by famine, from the legends of the Cossacks to the iron factories of the Soviet Union, Ukraine and Russia have been bound together and torn apart by history. Understanding this history doesn't solve the conflict, but it shows us why it matters so deeply, why both nations fight not only for territory, but for the meaning of their past. Because in the end, history never truly stays in the past. It echoes in borders, in languages, and in the choices nations make about who they are and who they want to be. So I ask you, is history a prison, trapping nations in cycles of conflict? Or can new generations break free, writing a story that looks different from the past?